Well, thank you for coming to the first semester's afternoon discussion about the Steel Center. We have speaking with us today a panel of representatives from the Bowen School of Law at the University of Little Rock. We have the Dean and Professor. We have Anna, who is a traditional alum, a current Bowen student, and who's Assistant Dean and Assistant Dean of Career Services.
Correct.
Okay. So we're going to talk about, I suppose, law school in general, but in particular, certain competencies and skills that the liberal arts education makes law school go more successfully.
Hi, I think we should, if I can, entice people not to hide in the back. And we won't be offended if you walk out in the middle. Right. So, right, exactly. There's that natural tendency. You go into a big lecture room, law school lecture rooms are often, the big ones are tiered, and people still fill up the back rows, right? And even when I go to conferences and it's all professors, we do the same thing. I call that people. Anyway, well, thank you for having us here. So I'm going to kick us off, then pass it quickly to Dean Snyder, who is not just the Dean of Career Services, but is also a lawyer and is a partner in the law. He has a wide range of experience, and Anna, who is the Hendricks graduate, who is now our student in the part-time program and has an interesting job as a fundraiser by day. So we have a lot of different things to share. So first, I personally am a very strong believer in liberal arts education. So I'm a product of liberal arts education, so I'm pleased to be here. For that reason, I was a history major. I will say to you that, and I just want to get out of the gate because I think this is so important. I often meet students who want to apply to law school, and there seems to be some word out there that everybody has to be a political science major to go to law school, and nothing is further from the truth. In fact, some of the people who succeed most strongly in the first year, especially of law school, which tends to be the most challenging, and you can ask her if you think that's right. That was certainly my experience. The people who often do best may surprise you, the areas that do well. Music majors do especially well in law school. Philosophers do especially well in law school. Engineers do well. And I think if you think about mathematicians, for example, do very, very well. That's not to say that if you're a political science major, if you fit that profile, you won't do it.
We still want you.
But, and I think the reason is that when you get into law school, and I certainly struggled with this as a history major, and then I spent 4 years studying for a doctorate in history, which I ended up not getting. But I've been trained for 8 years in history, and I really had to change the way I thought and wrote because. Unlike, say, a musician or unlike, say, a mathematician, where you come in and you state, this is my conclusion or this is the assumption I'm going to defend, that's not the way typically historians work, right? Especially the kind of history I was doing, you began anecdotally, you began by introducing a person to try and explore things, very different way of thinking and writing. So I say this, again, not to scare away the historians among you, or the English majors or the political science majors, because those skills will serve you well. But to say that I think there are other skills that can serve you well. So all of those things that I've mentioned, philosophy, music, engineering, you probably have engineering at Hendricks, right? But all of those, physics, all of those things can also serve you very well because you're being trained to think in an analytical way. So I think in terms of the skill sets that are important and what is going to prepare you to do well out of the gate is first and foremost, any discipline that requires you to analyze, right? To begin to think deeply about problems, break them apart, look at their component elements, and then also, and one of the things I hear a lot, and I'd be interested to know what Dean Snyder says about this, but I hear from employers who I go out in differently than she does. My job is to go out and meet alums and talk to people and try and get them to open their pockets for the school. And I always ask them, how do you find our students? How are things? And I talk to other deans. And one of the things you hear a lot, one hears a lot, in going out and talking to members of the bar and judges is that they're very concerned in your generation about the lack of writing experience. And this is a great advantage that a school like Hendrix has, of course, because in the liberal arts education, you're doing a lot more writing on average than students at a big state university are doing, right? You may not think you're doing as much, but you're doing a lot more. And, think about why that's important. Lawyers' stock and trade is words, right? You get paid for the opinions you give. How do you get those opinions? You go and read stuff. You have to write it up. You have to think about it, put your ideas. So the more experience you can get, formal writing experience, and it's a thing. If you look at anything from popular press to the Chronicle of Higher Education, which I know all of you don't read, but some of you may someday, you will hear these laments about students not getting enough writing experience. We get lots of students who come in, and especially from big state universities, and I don't just mean the big state universities in Arkansas, but all over the country, who spend their entire undergraduate time taking multiple choice tests, right? And there's a place for multiple choice testing, right? I mean, it's one of the ways the bar exam tests, but it's not the only thing to do. So I just think the more writing experience you get, and then also it is important, and a lot of people don't like to speak publicly, but that if you can seek opportunities where, whether it's in drama, I was a theater nerd in high school, and I did some of that and did a lot of singing in college. And I actually think those performative parts of your personality, if you can help draw that out, can help as well. That's an important skill, right? Lots of lawyers are kind of frustrated actors of one sort or another, but there is a performative part of the profession. And I don't mean just going in court, right? My dad was a lawyer. He was very proud of the fact, except for the one time that I got a traffic ticket as an adolescent and he went to court with me. He was very proud of the fact that he never stepped foot in a courtroom. But when you're dealing with clients, when you're dealing with people, you have to stand up and present an opinion. And so it's important to be able to articulate that, because articulating something briefly, a conclusion, is different than writing out why you think something has to happen. So I would say, in sum, don't think that you have to do one thing and not another as a major, right? You want to be a biology major, there are terrific careers in law that combine an interest in biology, right? And actually, and they're incredibly lucrative and they're incredibly important for the society. Why? Because you can become a member of the patent bar, which is separate from the legal bar. Which is a very privileged position. You use your scientific knowledge in biology, physics, whatever the discipline is, and you're doing a great service to the society and making a very great living, right? You're a sociology major. Family law has lots of things that, or a psychology major, there are lots of things you can take from that major and apply in an area of law that every community needs, where you're resolving conflicts that tend to go to the heart of human relations. That can be very useful knowledge. So there will always be something you can use. That's my first lesson. Second, write, talk. And third is talk, whether that's performing or find ways to refine your oral skills. And again, for the oral skills in particular, lots of people, I know that I see it in class, sometimes people just get paralyzed. They just don't want to talk, right? Anna's my student right now, and I'm often punishing her because she often has the answer, and then she answers one question. It happened just 2 nights ago, right, in class. She answered one question, and I said, great, that's a good answer. No good deed goes unpunished. And she rolls her eyes at me like, oh, he's done this to me again, but I do this deliberately, right? Because it's not just to get someone who is bright and knows the answer, but you want to encourage that habit of following up, of treating them like they are your lawyer and you're the client, right? So anyway, so that's what I got. Let me turn this over to Dean Snyder, unless anyone has any quick question for me, or do you want to hold off questions to the end, or what do you?
Yeah, I think that might work best.
Okay,
We'll do that at the end.
all you.
Okay, I'm Diana. I'm the Dean for Career Services. As they said, I practiced for 8 years before I came to the law school, and not to date myself too incredibly much, but I've been at the law school now for about 8 years too. If you tell me it looks like I can't possibly be that old, I'll like you even more. But through my time at the law school, just working with students, my favorite thing is just like the diverse backgrounds that students come to law school with. I mean, it is what makes law school fun. Everyone's got a different perspective. Just because we've been talking about this so much, raise of hands, how many people are political science majors? If you all are, we probably don't need to keep harping on me too. You don't have to be a political science. Okay, so only a couple. Okay, good. We've got different backgrounds here. So I always tell students when I'm meeting with them in their first year, and I hope students come to law school not knowing what they want to do with their law degree, right? Because if you come in thinking you already know, you're not opening yourself up to all the different areas and what might be like the best fit for you, right? I mean, you can use, I always joke and say, you can use a law degree to do anything except practice medicine. Probably don't want to do that. Other than that, really a law degree is a great foundation for anything besides that. You can teach with it. You can be in HR, you can be in compliance, you can work for banks, hospitals, law firms, government. I mean, it's kind of an oyster type degree. You can pick what you want to do with it, which really makes it unique. And you can also change your path with it, which is really cool and something you can't always do with every degree. So lots of different disciplines and backgrounds lend themselves to success. Just a fun little, like, so you know, I recently had a panel discussion with lawyers, and I had one student that particularly hit with the panelists because he showed up early. He was sitting in the front row. He was asking questions. He was engaged. He was looking at them. Everything on his resume is from being a water skier. That's what he did in college. That's what he did in high school. It's what he's done as his career. He's coached, completely unconventional, but he's so interesting and he's so dedicated. He's also a really good student, which helps a whole lot. But I mean, just anything that you've got, your background makes you interesting. And law is a place where those differences really are valued and accepted, which I think is really fun. The two things that I will say in my first or second year in this position, I had a student come in and tell me, what kind of law should I practice? I really hate reading and writing. Which is like, oh, honey, you probably should just scratch this and start over. So you do need to love reading and writing because you're going to do a whole lot of that in law school. Most things that you will do with a law degree will require some level of reading and writing and analyzing. I mean, that's kind of the game. But the ways that you can implement those skills can vary very much from job to job. Law can be very people facing, and you can be interacting with people every day if that's your jam. If you get energy from people, and that's kind of where you draw your energy, lots of jobs doing that. If that's not your jam and you prefer like your space, you like your time and you do your task, tons of jobs like that in law too. So it really is just a flexible profession, and it's a flexible degree. So every once in a while I'll go to career fairs and talk on behalf of admissions to try and get students to come. And it's a great, even if you don't quite know what you really want to do yet, law can be a great place to go. It's a great forwarding degree for you to be able to do a whole lot of different things. So I think that can be really valuable. As Colin mentioned, the sciences, engineering, biology, chemistry, those can be really great backgrounds for IP work, intellectual property work, knowing those technical terms.
Same with software design.
Yes, correct.
Computer science.
Correct, 100%. Sociology, psychology, all of it's awesome for family law, awesome for working for THS. Those are great jobs. Lots of stability, lots of ability for upward movement. So there's really just kind of a plethora of things you can do, except practice medicine. Then you're not for us. Otherwise, we're your jam. So I'm better at questions. I don't want to just talk at y'all. So if y'all have questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. I'm here and happy, but I don't want to just talk at you if I don't know what you want to hear. So
Before we go to Anna, can I just share two things that build upon this? So because I think this really illustrates some of these points. The first is, so I taught at Tulane in New Orleans for a long time, and I had a student there. I was both in the undergraduate school and the law school, and I had a student who was doing both programs. And he had become, after college, I don't remember what his major was. He had become a professional poker player online because he wanted to live abroad. He moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and he became a professional poker player, like doing this online poker. I mean, very good living apparently. And he went to the Tulane Career Services office, and he had this in his resume, and they said, "You have to take that out," as if it was sinful or something. And he came to me and he said, "I'm confused." I said, "You absolutely should improve it." Well, not only is that a great talking point, right? I mean, everybody wants to talk about that more than, some kind of more run-of-the-mill job you had, but also think of the skills that make you a successful poker player, right? I mean, he's now working for a big hedge funds money something in DC. And I'm sure making a miss. So, don't think, and the water skier made me think of this. Do not underestimate the skill that may draw people's attention, and to have something that will be talked about. The other thing is, she said it's really, with respect to anyone who's vegetarian or vegan, here I have a lot of vegans in my family, so I tried. Many of you have had David's Burgers, right? The mastermind behind that is a Bowen Law School graduate, and he attributes a lot of his business success not because he got an MBA, but because of the analytical skills and the organizational skills he acquired in law school. I think he practiced for a very, very brief period. Anyway, so I just wanted to share because there are two.
no, it's so true. Put everything on your resume that's interesting. And you've heard me say it a million times. We're about to go into our interviewing season, so I'm in interview mode right now. Employers love seeing something fun on a resume that they can talk to you about. Go abroad and study, do everything you can.
Remember you.
Yes, there's only so many times you can listen to a student talk about how they've wanted to be a lawyer since they were 3, and I went into interviews with that, and I still got a job. But do something fun that people can talk about. Okay, I hope I cut you off.
No, you're good. I think one of the benefits of a Hendricks education is we often leave having done something fun. But my name is Anna Linson. I graduated in 2019, so 5 years ago now, and I'm a 2L in the part-time section at Bowen. I do have a political science major, so one of the majority at the law school. But have been there for about a year and a half now, and it's been a great experience. I do work full-time, so I have a little bit of unusual day-to-day life. My Google Calendar is locked in. But I'm a fundraiser for a early stage nonprofit startup based in Silicon Valley, which is an interesting intersection of the world that I can talk about offline, I'm sure. And all that being said, I had a little bit of a less conventional start to my law career, in that I set for the bar my senior year of Hendricks, and decided to take a year off, as many of us do. And then the pandemic started shortly thereafter, and I had the forethought. 22-year-old me had a moment of wisdom to wait until later in my 20s to pursue my law degree. I didn't want to do law school online. And so for students in the room that are considering whether you want to go straight to law school, as many of your peers probably are, or take a year off, or take many years off. Success looks very different for each person, so take the time that you need. There are folks in my section that there's a woman that's 40 years old and has 2 grown children and is coming back to school for her law degree and will practice. She'll work at a firm. So all that to say, I know I've got
A policeman.
there is a policeman, Officer Dixon. Yes, he's having a great time in our criminal procedure class right now.
The governor's budget director.
The governor's budget director. Yes.
We have some people who are retired and have come back just for fancies.
Yes. Yes. That's wild.
Right? Like, I would go into bird watching.
Yes, which is full scope of people, which is kind of nice to have folks to learn from that have a different walk of life than you do. 100%. Yes, as far as what I can speak to from my time at Hendricks and how that's benefited me at the law school, I'll just share one quick story and then get to more of the brass tacks. I had an opportunity to sit in on OCIs and an interview with some employers.
On campus interview.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The acronyms just kind of get you. It's when firms in town would come in and interview students and you have an opportunity to talk to them and maybe get a clerkship or an internship with them. And I went to go speak with a firm that's one of the big boys in town, you know, and they had my resume in front of them and they had highlighted and like circled Hendricks College 2019. I grew up in Texas, and so I didn't realize how much weight a Hendricks College degree carries, especially in the Arkansas legal community. And so, like, maybe leave with a little bit of a chip on your shoulder that your degree will be highly respected in the state. And that was a surprise to me, and they were really excited about that. And so, if that's a comfort at all to know you'll leave here with a degree that kind of speaks as you go into potential employment opportunities. Like Dean Crawford and Dean Snyder said, the reading and writing opportunities you have at Hendricks are unparalleled. I was writing papers in my computer science class and my drawing class, many classes that you don't think, oh, I'm going to write. And here I was writing, and so you certainly have plenty of opportunities to write. And I would say lean into that and go talk to your professors. If you're a strong writer, if you're ready to grow, regardless, they know what they're talking about. But one thing that Hendricks cultivated in me, and that I think has really paid off in my performance in the classroom, but also my desire to keep doing law school part-time, is I think Hendricks cultivates a level of curiosity in its students that you have to do well in law school. The answer to a question in a law class is very rarely, what is it, A or B? It's often, what is it? It's this, because this says, and it's a very long, there's a lot to consider and a lot to commit to memory, and a curiosity for what is the right answer and why is it that way has aided me well, and I think was instilled in me early in the Mills building over here and my politics classes with Dr. Kolev and the whole crew. And so go in knowing, regardless of if you choose Bowen or another law school or law school at all, my encouragement is that you're well equipped to succeed in the workplace or in higher ed, just with in the workplace, higher ed, all of the above, because you've been equipped and nurtured to have a curious mind. That's my word. I do think questions are helpful.
I will echo really quick. The Hendricks students that we have come to law school are by and large incredibly successful. I mean, she is 1000% correct in saying that the undergrad education we're getting now is setting you up to be very successful in law school. So don't let the thought of like big math law school make you think that it's scary. Y'all are doing a lot of the work now to be able to do that with I hate to use the word ease, because law school wasn't easy, but with more ease, because you are kind of built in the right way after you come out of it.
And although it may seem like we're all here just blowing smoke about districts, this is really.
Yes.
Give an example. I told Dr. Dow I had lunch today with a relatively recent alum, 2 or 3 years out today, who's just had such an interesting career already. So he went to Hendricks, then he was at Bowen. He actually worked for our Center for Racial Justice for a couple of years, and now he's working. And I didn't really realize this about his firm, but imagine this: he's working for a relatively small firm based in Little Rock. What do? They do plaintiff side class action. Now, when you hear that, you usually think that that's a firm that does medical malpractice, or the big guys you see on the billboards on the highway. No, they do consumer protection and data privacy class action. They're going to be coming after your nonprofits.
Yeah.
Generally, cases are against firms like Meta and other big firms in Silicon Valley on these consumer protection and data privacy. I mean, how interesting is that, right? And and I think you can attest to his intellectual qualities as well. I mean, this is someone who's really using his liberal arts education, and in Little Rock, Arkansas, doing something that has national scope, right? These are class actions that are national, protecting consumers in different ways. So, they're just, I think there are opportunities that you might not anticipate.
And one other thing I will say off of that, in questions from us, is just to kind of instill how much Bowen knows its students and supports its students. Without knowing he was going to say that, and without him using any names, I know what student he's talking about, and I know what firm he's talking about. So we do know the people that go, and we know where they end up, and we help them and support them throughout. So, ask us questions.
Yes, please, especially in the back, if you can feel free, like anybody.
Yes.
And if you could say what year in school you are, it's always interesting.
I'm a second year and I'm a philosophy major. Just want to ask about, like, I guess balancing between like going straight to law school and like a gap year. I know like sometimes gap years can be good to like avoid burnout, but I was just thinking like I guess some constructive ways that you could kind of structure a gap year in terms of like not just like burning yourself out with school, but also keeping yourself kind of sharp and like just staying ready to make the transition to law school.
Yes. One thing I did during my gap for 4 or 5 years, I went and worked for an attorney in Little Rock.
Mhm.
And one question I was grappling with during that time was, I think when we think about law school, we think about like Law and Order and Legally Blonde. And not so much like the day-to-day, what does it look like to be an attorney?
Mhm.
Often sitting in your office alone with a bunch of books open and texting. And so I wanted to learn, is this a profession that I would actually enjoy doing? And is this a pace of life that I could see myself
Mhm.
in? And so I ended up working for a gentleman who is a Hendricks alum, funny enough. And he did personal injury law in North Little Rock, so lots of folks that were in car accidents and things. And his wife was an adjunct at Bowen also, and she did the more corporate side of law and worked for several different companies in Little Rock and represented them. But all that to be said, working for or interning for or just even shadowing an attorney for any period of time is good time. It's time well spent, because you can really see, is this something that I want to do, or is this type of law something I want to do? I think there's certainly value to spending a few years in the workforce in any capacity. I landed in nonprofit and spent my early career as a fundraiser, and there it's it's interesting seeing the young folks that come right out of undergrad and roll right into law school. Many are burnt out often. But I think there is a benefit to having some workplace experience and some of that interpersonal skill that you learn by having a traditional boss, being an employee, and having coworkers that you can bring to your studies and to your interaction with your peers. So working is great. It's a great opportunity for us to save your money or take the LSAT again, or to travel or spend time with friends and family. But say top priority for that time, whether it be a year or longer, would be to find an attorney and to work for them for a little bit of time if you're able. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, as I mentioned, after college, I was in a graduate program for 4 years, and then I needed a year I was going to apply to law school, and I got a job working for the district attorney in New York in narcotics prosecutions. And this kind of builds on what Anna said. I left that year thinking, I will never in my life do criminal law. And it was instructive, right? I didn't say no to law, but I said, cross that one off the list, and I never looked back. So I think that's good advice. But I also, and it doesn't need to be 1 year, right? It doesn't need to be a gap year. To do something you like and helps you learn something about yourself. As I said, my student who was a poker player, he's one of the best students I ever had, right? He was a poker player for 5 years out of the country. Right? He learned Spanish. You can use you don't have to do just one thing.
So the only thing I would add is that I think it is an individual path to law school for people. I went straight through. I went straight to law school. I know myself well enough to know if I had stopped education, I wouldn't have gone back. Freedom of working and making money and creating a career for myself, I wouldn't have stopped it. So I was a straight through person. That works for some people. It doesn't work for some people. And I think either one is perfectly fine. Our students come in and I can tell you easily, there's no difference between immaturity level. Sometimes, if you've got a student that's non-traditional student that's had a whole career before they come to law school, just as far as business acumen goes, yes, there may be a gap. Success in law school and grades in law school and ability to understand the material, your path can be your path. And if your path goes straight through, it goes straight through. If your path takes a detour, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a detour, it's just your path. Your path just might be different. And what you do with that gap year, or gap years, whatever you decide to do, it can inform what you want to practice. Like Colin said, I always tell students it's easier to decide what you don't want to practice than it is to figure out exactly what you want to practice. So if I have a student that comes in and says, I have a criminal law experience and there's no way I'm practicing criminal law, got it, understand. But if I have a 1L student, 1L is what we call them, 1L, 2L, 3L, tell you call your peers. If I have a 1L student that comes in and tells me, I absolutely want to do real estate transactions, I'm like, but are you sure? That's what I did a lot of that. So I enjoy it, but most people don't really. It's much easier to weed stuff out through experience. So I do think Anna is 1000% correct. If you have the opportunity to be a runner, to be a legal assistant, to be a receptionist, anything to get you in a legal environment, working in that type of office can be informative. If that's not what you do, we've got a ton of teachers, police officers, everything. It runs the gamut that we've got in our building. And all of those experiences form their outlook in law school. And it makes it a really fun group of people to learn from because everyone comes from a different background and a different perspective. So straight through, not straight through, doesn't matter. Either one is okay. It depends on kind of what your vibe is and what works best for you, I think.
So I know you mentioned like it's a lot easier to figure out what kind of law you don't want to practice than it is to practice. in like getting into a legal office. What like other advice do you have for somebody who's still trying to figure out like what kind of law that you want to do? Also, I'm sorry, I'm JT, I'm a junior. I forgot to mention that. What do you have to what do you think?
So I would say a couple of different things. So in law in general, there are kind of two different sides that they call litigation and transactions, right? So with litigation, there are lots of different areas of litigation. You can see a lot of that by going and observing court. The Faulkner County Courthouse would be happy to have you typically, and happy to have you watch trials. You may or may not want to introduce yourself to the judge. I always suggest trying to first, especially if you want to go to law school. Never hurt. And also knows everything I say is network, network, network. So you might as well start now. But there's nothing wrong with going to the courthouse and trying to watch and see what you enjoy. You'll find out really quick if the criminal stuff is overwhelming. I was in law school, not in undergrad, but I might have done it in undergrad. And I don't know with this one. But I observed a whole lot of juvenile court while I was in law school. And through that, I learned really quickly that that wasn't something I could practice. Because if I did, I would bring home like 10 children a day. And it just wasn't for me. It was more than I emotionally could handle. So not for me. So just observing court can help a whole lot. You won't get the transactional side with that because that's outside of the courtroom. So for that, the law office experience is kind of better. But I think just through your coursework, figuring out the things you're good at and what you enjoy, paying attention to that. And then when you get your law school, when you figure out where you're going, come and talk to like me. Law school, if it's us, come and talk to me. If it's not us, come to me. And we can kind of talk through what your strengths are, what you enjoy, and then what might be a good fit.
And if I, for my 2 cents on this, and use my own example. So when I was in law school, I realized that I did best beyond, in law, you have a certain number of required courses that are typically bar tested course you have to take. But I ended up, for my electives, finding the people, the professors who I thought could teach me interesting ways to think, right? And so they weren't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily the course that I thought, I want to do that more than anything else. But one of the best course probably ever took in law school is going to sound really dull to you, I would imagine. It was local government law. It just blew my mind open.
Stimulating.
It was because of the professor. It wasn't subject matter. And he really taught me ways to think that I still use. And in my case, I'd always been very interested in environmental issues. The first thing I ever published was about the environment. I went to environmental law, which was then a relatively new discipline. I mean, now all law schools have it, but it was relatively new in the curriculum. The professor was so boring the first day. I thought, if I stick in this class, I'm going to get a C. And I dropped it. I ended up becoming an environmental lawyer. Why? And there's a suggestion here. Why? Because one morning when I was working for a big firm, I arrived. I was such a scared associate. I would get to work at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I was in the elevator with a woman who turned out, I didn't know who she was. She turned out to be head of the environmental practice group. And she had seen a live body in the elevator at 7 o'clock in the morning, and she had an assignment. So she called me up immediately. And I ended up loving that work, right? Because I connected with the material. And the lesson here is not that that's how you should become an environmental lawyer, but open yourself to whatever possibility. And here I'll just end on a plug for Bowen. I think if you're going to stay here, one of the great advantages we have to offer is that our students can intern or extern over the course of their degree unless they're a part-time student which is more limited because they have 2 jobs. They're a student and they have a job. But we have students who go and work for public agencies, who work for the government, who work for a big firm, a little firm, all sorts of different ways. And you can, so be open to lots of different possibilities.
Yeah, it's okay not to have an answer going.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the folks that do have an answer going in, hey, either there's something really big that happened in your life that has given you that answer, right? Or you just pick something, you just picked. But I agree wholeheartedly, and I think that was the experience often here at Hendrix, is you get to try a lot of new things. And you get to decide that is or is not for me. Criminal law, I know we keep saying it, all three of us. Criminal law is also not for me just because I don't have the nerve for it.
It's a wonderful career.
It's a
I wish I'm a true crime podcaster. I just can't.
Like metal, you know, so I
Me.
but I learned that because I took my criminal law class, and as we were getting through the material, I was like, wow, this is actually really intense. But then I went to my contracts class and I was having a great time, which is very, on paper, it does not sound exciting. But I was loving learning about how do you form a contract? Is an oral contract, does that count? And you know what makes, so all that to be said, often it's experiential, and it's a
I mean, for example, this Hendrix grad and Bowen grad who I had lunch with today. What motivates him? I mean, I bet if you had asked him when he was at Hendrix what kind of law, I think he knew he wanted to law school always. But if I had said to him, if I knew him then, you know, what kind of law, I think he would say something that advances social justice because we have an inequitable society. That's what has driven his whole life, right? If you had said to him, oh, and that means you want to do class actions in the data privacy area. So what are you talking about? Right? But he's connected his passion, right? The way he conceives of himself as an individual with a legal area that serves that. And so I think, you know, that's, you know, trust the inner voice that says, these are the things that matter to me. And included in that can be making a very good living. That you know, that is a valid reason to go to law school. Right?
So 2 quick other points to that. First, not to be a buzzkill on it, but take into account where you want to live. If you want to live in Little Rock or in Central Arkansas in general, you're probably not going to practice entertainment law full time. Probably not doing sports law full time. And those are 2 that every time we have one else come in and I send off a survey on what do y'all want to practice, tons of them, and I'm just like, guys. Or every once in a while I'll have like, yeah, right. Like, I mean, we're a landlocked state with a national airport. International law is another one. Probably not a whole lot of that in Arkansas. So there are a few areas where you just also need to be realistic about it. It doesn't mean you can't do any of it. You know, there's some of it everywhere, but probably not your full time job. The other thing I will say is sometimes you don't find the type of law. Sometimes the type of law finds you.
Like environmental law.
Yes, like environmental law in your case, and in my case, it was commercial litigation. So I clerked for a firm. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but it was a full service law firm. I worked with them. I loved the people. I loved the office environment. I loved being there, and I just wanted to work there. And they had 5 different teams. They had employment law, commercial litigation, transactional,
And something else.
and something else because it's late and I can't think of it right now. So we had all the different parts and you could get hired onto any team. Obviously it bleeds a little bit from team to team, but I honestly didn't know where I wanted to be. I just knew I wanted to work there. And then I got an offer for the business lit team, which is, and I was just like, business lit sounds great. It's what I've always wanted to do. I don't really know what that is, but I'll figure it out when I get there. And that's what I did. And I loved it. It was a perfect fit for me. It was the right level of litigation and transactions kind of married together. And it was a wonderful fit. So sometimes it's the people that guide you instead of like you just having a set, this is what I know I want to do. And that's okay too. Sometimes it just finds you.
Did you have a question?
I actually have 2. I'm Jaden, I'm first year. And what does practicing law mean?
That is an
Excellent.
You want to take it or you want me?
Please.
Okay, so when I reference practicing law, I think about working for either a law firm or a government agency like public defender, prosecutor, legal aid, some of Attorney General's office, a place where your primary purpose is to either prosecute or defend a lawsuit.
For which you have
Or-
obtained a license.
For which you have obtained a license. That's very important. Or where you're working on a business deal that requires lawyers to complete it.
For which.
So, for which you
after law school?
So
You have to do it after.
So the license, when I say license, so if you go to law school and then you take the bar exam, right? If you take the bar exam, it's a horrible 2-day ordeal. It
But
is.
don't let that scare you.
It's just, it is what it is, but, and if you pass, which I mean, that's why most people go to law school, you get a license, you become a lawyer, right? A licensed lawyer, and you can, so go
And
ahead.
then you can do all of that. Without that, you're doing the unauthorized practice of law, which is a huge no-no. Strongly don't recommend. 0 out of 10. But the other side of it, so I always, whenever I'm talking to people and trying to tell them what lawyers do, I always think about where I was before I went to law school. All those things you can think of that you don't know how to do, and you're wondering who in the world helps you do it. Like, how do I form a business? How in the world does that work? Who knows how to do that? If I wanted to start that process, what would I do? All those things you don't know how to do, it's lawyer. That's who knows how to do it. That's who you go to. So if you're practicing law, you're doing things that you have to have passed the bar exam to do and have that law license to do. And typically it's litigation, either on the prosecutor or defender side for a party in a lawsuit, or it's in a transactional situation. So that's when you get into like mergers and acquisitions, buying property, buying companies, creating companies, all that kind of stuff. Wills and estates, drafting a will, going through the probate process if someone passes away, custody agreements, divorces, all of that is lawyers. So all of that kind of gray area around all the professions that fills in the gaps, all those gaps are kind of filled in by lawyers.
And the reason I think we all said, what a good question, is that, and I think, and it's useful to have asked it, because there are all of these things where only people who have the license can do it. But a significant and increasingly larger number of people go to law school, and even if they obtain the license, they don't practice law. And I'll give you 2 examples. I mentioned the guy who runs David's Burgers, right? The business mastermind. He uses his legal skills, but he's not practicing law. He will hire lawyers. He does lots of property acquisition, and he will hire lawyers to do that, right? But he can talk the talk because he's been there. Or, for example, we have a lot of students who she has very successfully placed with the Federal Reserve Bank. You've heard of the Federal Reserve, right? The people who certainly not set interest rates for the country. The Federal Reserve banks are, I'll try not to get too deep into these, but they're divided up into regions, and we're in the St. Louis region, I think. So we have a number of graduates now who are getting out of law school. They take the bar. They don't practice law because the Federal Reserve likes the fact that they have very good analytical skills. They're not hiring MBAs for these jobs. They're analysts of business structures. They go in and do audits of businesses, right? But they're using their legal analytical skills. And again, they're being hired instead of MBAs, right? Maybe an economics PhD would get hired ahead of them. They are getting hired. They're not practicing law. They're using, and by the way, they get paid like $85,000 a year to start, and they get how much? They're always off work too.
Flex Fridays, and yeah, they've got all this vacation time.
Right, it's pretty
They
amazing,
get comp time when they're overnight somewhere doing an audit.
so there's lots of jobs for which people have law degrees, and even if they get the license, they're not actually practicing law. That's why it really was. That is a good question.
Yeah, I'll let you go. Then I'll do the JD Advantage.
Yeah. Just we use the term practicing law, we just kind of like to. I think a good comparison would, or a metaphor, for instance, has helped me understand what this means. For instance, like you hear doctors say, "Oh, I'm practicing medicine." So if they're practicing medicine, they work at a hospital or they have a private practice. They're seeing patients and they're doing that work. A doctor could decide, I don't want to practice medicine anymore, and hang up their white coat and not see patients anymore and take a regular job. They're still a medical professional, but they're just not practicing anymore. Same with attorneys. You can practice, you can see clients and do everything that they said, or you can decide, I don't want to be practicing anymore, and I'd like to do a different job, like how Dean Snyder has come to oversee and run and do all of the career.
Yes, neither you nor I are practicing law anymore.
But we both did.
Yeah, and you have a second question?
And real quick on that, it's a whole thing. The JD Advantage jobs, if you don't want to practice, that's what we call them. So a JD is the degree you get if you go to law school. It's your Juris Doctorate degree. So if you go to law school and get your JD, you can take the bar, pass the bar, you can. If you pass the bar and you don't want to practice, or if you decide you don't want to take the bar, you can get a JD Advantage job. And those jobs are typically in compliance, HR. I mean, you can do anything, David's Burgers. There's a ton of things you can do. That's where I kind of say you can do anything with a law degree except practice medicine. Like really a JD kind of sets you up for a lot of that. If you're not technically practicing like we've described, we call it a JD Advantage job. You haven't advantage to getting the job because you got your JD. You're probably going to get a little pay bump because you have your JD starting out, but you don't have to pass the bar and be a licensed attorney to take the job. So, second.
Do any of the people you know who are lawyers or attorneys have a stutter? Is that something that would prevent you from getting the job, having a stutter?
I know someone who has a pronounced stutter, who has very successfully practiced law at 2 separate firms. And I think you probably know who I'm speaking of. And it's never
And
been.
actually, we have a faculty member who's a licensed lawyer too.
The person I'm thinking of worked in a big defense firm, and now coincidentally he's at a class action firm. But he presents very well. Over the years, he has managed it and figured out how to. It has never been an impediment in any way to his success. He is very much an orator. He speaks. He, as part of his job, he comes and does interviews for the firm, and it's never been an issue at all. Not even, not at all. And I've worked with him pretty much since I started working as a lawyer. So I've known him for 15, 16 years. Never been an issue. Yeah, so.
Every time you guys talk about David's Burgers, I know exactly who you're talking about. The senior.
No, junior.
Junior, okay.
Senior is the design, this is according to junior. Senior is the conceptual guy, like we're gonna do a restaurant that looks like this.
Yeah,
Alan Junior is the one who makes it happen.
yes, my mother works at the law firm that represents.
Okay.
I'm Maggie, I'm a sophomore math major. I'm thinking about going into engineering right after. I want to ask about intellectual property, so that regards copyright, patent, trademark. Do attorneys in that field typically specialize in one or like a combination?
It varies.
Okay, so I would say, depending on where you want to go, if you're planning on staying in this region, I would say typically IP attorneys take a little bit of all of it to fill their plate. In private practice around here, I would say they definitely are doing everything. There are also lots of IP attorneys that are employed by like the U of A and hospitals. So that's also a route. With that, you're probably doing a lot more of the patent work than you're doing with like trademark, you know. But I would say typically they do a little bit of all of it because it's a smaller state with, you know, so you kind of gotta all of it. I will say having the engineering background will do you really well in getting covered in that area. Just as a personal anecdote, I went to law school with one of my very best friends in law school. We studied together all the time. We both clerked at the firm I worked for out of law school together. And we both loved it. We both wanted to get hired. So we kind of banded together to everything they invited us to together. We drove down from Fayetteville together to go because we were just like, they will hire us together. And he got an offer after his first year of law school, which is unheard of, does not happen. But he got it because he had the engineering background, he had a biology master's. So it made sense because it's such a specialized thing. When you find someone that has that, they snatch him. We kept going together. I got an offer after second year of law school, which is normal for someone that doesn't have a specialist background like that. So we did both end up there. But if you've got that kind of super specific background, you're really setting yourself up.
Also,
Also, just put on your radar, you can take the patent bar at any point in time. You don't have to have finished law school. You don't have to have passed the bar
You don't
exam.
have to start at law school.
No, you can do it at any point. You can take the patent bar. So whenever you've got some spare time and you decide you want to study and pass it, do it. That's one thing marked off. And you've got one extra credential.
And on your question, do people do copyright, trademark together or separately? This goes back, the answer partly goes back to your question about market. So if you especially, it doesn't sound like it, but if you wanted to trademark law, you'd probably be very well suited to go to Los Angeles or San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a lot of companies that are seeking to be trademarked. If you want to do copyright, you'd probably go to LA only. LA or New York area because of the literary properties that are also going to be made in movies and so forth, right? If you wanted to do patent, right, especially in DC or also then in, Silicon Valley, depending if it's IP related, or, Houston, where there's a lot of patent in science related areas, places like that. So it would depend on the area to some extent.
But there are people in Arkansas that do
All the time.
full-time IP practice doing all three.
Thank you.
So you mentioned with was it the on-campus interviews with law firms that come in and talk, that's my understanding, am I correct? That's okay, so I guess my question is, what are some things that I can do, like, while if I'm in law school, that will make myself like an attractive candidate to firms or even like outside employers, like you said, the Federal Reserve, like what can I do while I'm in law school to make myself good for them?
So I feel like this is. Okay, so the things you can do, first and foremost, have good grades, study hard, work hard, do the best you can. First semester coming in sometimes is a shocker for a lot because
She just present, what's your instrument? I just have to.
Trumpet.
oh my God, I thought you did already sure.
Sorry, to interrupt. I just couldn't resist.
Thank you for being. If you have any questions, always available. So always having good academic performance always helps. It's not the only way to get a job, but it definitely helps. If you think about it, students in general from every institution that get into law school were likely in the top of the class at all of their institutions. Then they all get thrown in a group together and they can't all be at the top of the class. So first semester sometimes is a little bit rough where everyone figures out how you do law school. That's okay. Don't let that freak you out. Take some time to get your bearings. It'll all work itself out. But academic performance is always great. Extracurriculars, I think, help a lot. It shows a real well-rounded person. So doing moot court, doing law review or the journal, writing, presenting, all of those skills, anything you can do to show those skills. Yes, leading student organizations, being an officer in a student organization, having elected positions in a student organization. You're showing all the skills that a lawyer needs to have, which is leadership, likability, ability to communicate and to take in information and put it out to people in a way that they can understand. The other part, and I would say this is unique to Bowen, while you're in law school, because we're in the capital city, you can work while you're in law school and you can build your legal resume also while you're in law school if you're a full-time student. Which can be a unique advantage because while you're getting your education, you've also now got a list of law firms you've worked for and experiences that you've had. Also, while you're in law school, you'll get an experiential learning experience, which means you'll either work in a clinic, meaning you're acting as an attorney for people just through the law school, or you're doing an externship where you're going and working for an office. A judge, for example, lots of judges do externships, so you're working with them. Those all go in your resume too. So you're just working on building that legal resume and showing those skills. Make sure you like to read.
Also, I would, and don't think it's just what you do in law school. And I'll give you an example. So one of my first year, we have a mentoring program, and I 5 first-year mentees. So they're all first-year law students. So one of them came to me after this semester, and he went straight out. He's very young. He's 20, 21. And he came and he said, I said, well, how was your first semester? He said, it's great. I'm second in the class. He said, good for you. And I was talking to him because of that. I was with some lawyers from a big firm in town the other day. And I was talking about them. And I said, I was so impressed by this young man because I think he went to UCA. And I said, when he was in college, he got his real estate license and started selling real estate. And they said, what's his name? Right? They wanted to know. And what attracted them is he showed an entrepreneurial streak. But once you get into a law firm, if you're going to work for a law firm, they're going to want you to bring in business eventually, right? So they said, have someone who has a skill that we want. We're not going to want it the first couple of years. He's not going to
But it
be
translates.
right. He's not going to be selling real estate while he's in law school, but they saw that said something about him, right? So don't think it's just the things you do in law school. It's what you're doing now.
We have 2 laws that,
Do it.
yeah, that's interesting.
This is minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Tonight, we haven't talked about something that's kind of 4-3 partnership.
Oh, yeah. Great.
So I think some faculty probably know about it, some students know about it. But can we describe that just so that students know what that is? Because it is recent development, and it's also something that people may be watching this later will be interesting stuff.
So I've been dean for a year and a half. And one of the things when I came in, we had either 3+3, which does not apply here, or the so-called 4+3 partnerships. What this means, and unfortunately, I should know these that often I don't remember it, but I could send it to you. It's on our website. With Hendricks, we now have a 4+3 arrangement. That means that if you have LSAT score X, I think it's a 154 above, but don't hold me to that, and GPA Y, I think it's 3.3 or above. But again, it's in that range. And you have no character and fitness issues, which means you don't have a criminal conviction that we have to go to the bar and explain in advance. If you have those 2 things and you're a Hendricks student and you apply, we will automatically admit you. And so that's a nice thing to have that comfort. And by the way, it also means that you will be an early admit. And one thing I should say that is against my interest, but it's true of our law school and every law school, don't think that the tuition amount you see on the website is the tuition amount you're going to pay. I always say to people, law school tuition is like buying a seat on the airplane, right? We're in the same row. Anna paid $200. I paid $300. She paid $250. Right? It can change, but the point is timing really matters, right? And the entering scholarships at our law school and almost all but 2 or 3 in the country, your scholarship will follow you so long as you continue to do well. So that's important to know. But the 4+3, I think, is a great advantage. And we did it because we want a stronger connection with a school that has such good students, right? And so there's a real incentive to do that.
It just takes out the uncertainty, you check boxes.
Mhm.
You got it.
And you're early in the applicant pool, because the earliness matters, because every school except the very, very schools, Virginia is a different map, for example, but every school has a limited fund amount of scholarship dollars every year. So if you're an early admit, you're more likely to get more scholarship money than late admits.
Mhm.
We're in time now, but if people have questions, would like to talk a little bit more, I'm sure the panelists will stick around.
Except Anna, she has to get to class.
But if you please join me in thanking them for.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.